everybody, welcome back to Sky Talks Books. My name is Sky and today we are going to be talking about one singular book. We're going to be talking about Wuthering Heights by none other than Emily Bronte. I have a lot of feelings. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this book, and some of them I'm a little bit dubious to talk about because I know this is a fan favorite, okay? I know this book is very dear to a lot of people's hearts. Bella Swan, for instance, from Twilight, it's her favorite book. Let's get the hardest part over with straight away. Let's just rip off the band-aid. My initial feelings kind of during reading this and upon finishing reading this was that this is very overrated, that this is an overrated classic. Since I've let the dust settle and since I've obsessively researched all the Bronte sisters, especially Emily, I'm unclear. So let's talk about it. Okay, so I loved the gothic elements of this, the dark elements, the fantasy elements. There just was nowhere near enough for this to be considered a gothic novel. There's gonna be spoilers in this, by the way, heavy spoilers. But yeah, I mean, whenever Heathcliff dug up Catherine's dead body, 18 years after she was buried, and just lay down next to her, that was iconic. I loved that. You know what I mean? I wanted more of that. That's so unhinged. And it's dark, gothic elements. Okay, I loved the ghosts. A lot of people don't like this book because all the characters are awful. They're unlikable. They're just terrible people. I didn't have a problem with that. I liked that. I like unlikable characters. My problem with this book was the choice of narration. So it's basically Mr. Lockwood, who, by the way, is not important for the story at all. He's really not. He's got nothing to do with what's happening. He is just a tenant that comes to Thrushcross Grange, and he's reporting Nellie Dean's account of the story, and Nellie is the housekeeper. So it's a dual narrative, meaning it's twice removed. And whilst of course that was a very innovative decision at the time, it was, something new, and I would love to just sit down with Emily and be like, why? For what? Why did you do this? Did you know you can just write in the first person? So that really is my biggest qualm. The narration style completely ruined this book. Imagine, okay, think of your most passionate, toxic relationship, okay? And then imagine how that story would be told through okay, we don't have maids, most of us don't have maids, so a housemate, just someone who is a bystander to the whole thing. Imagine everything would just get lost in translation, and I know that's part of the appeal, that Nellie Dean is an unreliable narrator, but just all the emotional elements are just lost, really. We've just got a lot of dialogue and a lot of melodrama for the sake of melodrama. Cathy and Heathcliff's relationship never made sense to me because we're getting this twice removed account on the whole thing. Not to mention it was confusing, who was talking at what point. I just wanted to see some real private scenes between Cathy and Heathcliff. What did they talk about while they were rambling around the moors? What did they have in common? What did they love about each other? I would like this to be rewritten, okay? Not only that, so that we've got the dual narrative, we've also got the anachronic narrative. So it plays with time, everything's all out of order, which just takes away from the impact as well. The start of the novel was super intriguing, because we've got those fantasy elements, the dark gothic elements, where Mr. Lockwood is staying in Wuthering Heights because he's just invites himself over. So, and he has that dream where he sees the ghost of Cathy, crawling in his window. Then he finds her diaries. And we get a little excerpt from her diaries. Why couldn't we have more of the diaries? That would have been a perfect literary tool. Diaries. Did Emily just forget about the diaries? Was she just whatever, this is not important. So yeah, I think reading the diaries would have helped with the romance element a lot, getting more of a sense of why they were so in love and obsessed with each other, Heathcliff and Cathy. And I think this book, if you read it through a romance lens, it kind of sucks. No, that's a strong word. It's not great, but if you read it through the lens of like the cycle of abuse, generational trauma, now we're talking. Because the latter half of the book, which I actually enjoyed way more, when, spoiler alert, when Catherine 1 dies, and then she has a daughter, and the daughter, and then Heathcliff has a son, and he like tries to force them to marry each other and to fall in love with each other, even though they are, you know, pretty much polar opposites. And so yeah, like I say, like I really enjoyed that part of the book. I liked how Emily found a way of describing how different they are, and this one particular instance where his name's Linton, right? Where Linton Heathcliff is describing his idea of heaven, like a heavenly day, which is lying like in the summer on the soft moss and just staring up at the sky. And Catherine the Second's idea of heaven is being high up in a tree while it's swaying, which honestly sounds like hell, but and they kind of have a sort of a little lover's quarrel about this, and I thought that summed up perfectly their different like worldviews. And I also liked the theme of masculinity and femininity, which I think was really interestingly explored, especially, you know, you gotta bear in mind, when Wuthering Heights was written, it was a time when gender norms and, you know, the confines of gender was very strict, you know, a lot more rigid and defined than they are now. And I think Wuthering Heights does a really good job of examining those stereotypes, and Bronte is constantly contrasting the masculinity and the femininity. Linton and Edgar are always being described as more feminine. When we're first introduced to Linton, we're, you know, just straight up, he's effeminate. But then you've got the two Catherines, which, although they are the epitome of, you know, stereotypical femininity on the outside, outrageously beautiful, etc., they are more, you know, rough and ready around the edges. You know, they ramble around the moors and roughhouse and stuff like that, especially Catherine I. Then we have Heathcliff, who is like exaggeratedly masculine. There's no if, where, or buts about it. He's all man, you know what I mean? And he scorns his poor wife Isabella for any, you know, femininity that she has, and scorns his son because he's like a wimp, a whimsy in his eyes. And then you have the fact that Catherine loves Heathcliff because he is her. They are the same person. There's so many quotes about them being the one person. I shall read them to you. He's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. So she obviously really strongly identified with that masculinity. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight but necessary. So it's so, I mean, their love and their passion is so like visceral and intrinsic. And, you know, she literally says, Nellie, I am Heathcliff. He's always in my mind. Not as a pleasure any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. Like, they're just bonkers for each other, what can you say? And then Nellie is just like, kind of the voice of reason. Well, poor thing, I mean, she's just trying to like make sure she doesn't get fired, and she's trying to keep all these crazy, terrible people from doing terrible things that like her boss doesn't want them to do. I also wanted to... Are you okay, honey? Is it boring? I mean, yeah, when Wuthering Heights first came out, like, people weren't a fan. And I read some reviews from 1848 from various newspapers. For instance, this one is from the weekly newspaper, Douglas Jerrold's weekly newspaper, the 15th of January, 1848. In Wuthering Heights, the reader is shocked, disgusted, almost sickened by details of cruelty, inhumanity, and the most diabolical hate and vengeance. And anon come passages of powerful testimony to the supreme power of love, even over demons in the human form. I think that's kind of a good review, I'm not really sure. From the New Monthly magazine, The book sadly wants relief. A few glimpses of sunshine would have increased the reality of the picture and given strength rather than weakness to the whole. I agree. Like, if there's just unrelenting darkness and drama and vengeance, I think it doesn't really have the same impact. It's like, okay, more of this. Like, oh, okay, right, he's digging up the dead body. Of course he is. Yeah. Oh, we've got someone else, like, dying because they got upset. Oh, someone else died of a cold. Okay, and this is my favorite one. It should have been called Wuthering Heights. And this is from Tate's Edinburgh magazine. Mr. Ellis Bell, because that was Emily Bronte's pen name at the time, before constructing the novel, should have known that forced marriages under threats and in confinement are illegal and parties instrumental thereto can be punished, and second, that wills made by young ladies, minors, are invalid. So this guy, I presume he's a man, just has problems with, like, fact-checking of the novel. Fair enough. So yeah, then I watched a documentary about the Bronte sisters, and in the village that she grew up and where she wrote Wuthering Heights and was inspired to write Wuthering Heights and where it's based, at one point 41% of the population died before the age of 6, and everyone was just super ill because basically the water was being filtered through the graveyard, and like obviously the more people died, the more dead bodies got piled up, and you know, so you gotta kind of bear that in mind. Maybe her brain was like a little bit poisoned. So yeah, she was surrounded by a lot of death, and also like most of her family died, and then she died. And rumor has it that Charlotte Bronte killed Anne and Emily slowly over time with arsenic. Because arsenic has this, when you're being poisoned by arsenic, it has the same symptoms as TB, or consumption as they called it in those days. Which is fascinating. Apparently, out of jealousy. But like, can't they like dig up the bodies or something to like do some like tests of, wow, I sound like Heathcliff. But I think there's probably some science that exists, right, that you can find out, like, did they die of arsenic or consumption? I don't know. To conclude, did I like this book? Yes and no. At some points it was just such a trek to get through. But it is, like, there's no doubt about it, it is iconic. It's an iconic book. I think it needed like a bit of a rewrite. I think this is the first draft. And it started kind of this fascination that I have with the Bronte sisters, and because this is actually the first Bronte novel that I've read, and of course now I'm going to read something from Charlotte and something from Anne, and we're gonna maybe do another video comparing all three sisters. Of course, that's what caused one of them to poison the others, the constant comparison and the jealousy. So overall, I'm happy I read this book, and I actually would reread it, because I think I probably wouldn't. It was such a trek in some places, honestly. So I am really interested to know your opinion on Wuthering Heights. Do you hate me now? Do you hate me because of everything I said? I'm sorry. I just have to speak my truth, and that's my truth.